Action. We are glad that you are joining us here today for our update on the CSBG Annual Report and the release of the next version of Roma Next Gen / CSBG Annual Report. My name is Denise Harlow. I'm the CEO of the Community Action Partnership. I'm coming to you today live from Salt Lake City. I'd like to thank Erin Trenbeth-Murray and her team here at Utah Community Action who are listening in a room off to my side to this webinar for hosting me while I'm visiting the agency here today and attending the Regional Head Start Association conference here tomorrow. Today's webinar is really going to talk about and give you an overview of where we are with Roma Next Gen, as we're calling it now, really the CSBG Annual Report. That is a much more accurate reflection of the work that we are currently engaged in. Today's webinar is being recorded. Please know that we are recording. We are encouraging you to put questions into the Q&A window. We do have Cash and You at our team back at our offices keeping track of the questions. We'll see what comes in. We are, I believe, waiting for questions until the end, although if something hot topic pops up, I believe the team at the office will flag that for us, and we may need to address some of those questions sooner rather than later. So get your questions in as soon as they come up. And you are hearing us out of your computer speakers or via the phone today. We do not have the capacity to unmute you today. It is a broadcast out, so keep that in mind as we go through here today. So please put your questions, though, in the Q&A window. If there's any challenges with audio, please go up to your Communicate tab, and you can, again, get the phone number to dial back in. You can reconnect audio-wise to your computer, but keep an eye on that Communicate tab if you run into any problems, or through the chat window, talk to Cashin. So let's go to the next slide. Today's webinar really is a partnership across the national organizations. Joined today certainly by Jeannie Chapin, the Director of the Office of Community Services, who has been instrumental in leading this effort nationally and bringing all of these pieces together. We also have Janae Bieland, the Executive Director of NASCSP, the National Association of State Community Services Programs, the lead agency for the Roma Next Gen effort over the last few years, has been the critical leverage point for the IS report and the current reporting process that agencies in the state go through to produce the report for OCS and to Congress. We also have Barbara Mooney from the Association of Nationally Certified Roma Trainers. You can't do Roma without Barbara Mooney, and we are thrilled that Barbara is on the phone as well with us today to walk through these core elements. Next slide. So what we want to talk about today. Now, we don't have a lot of time today, right? We're going to go an hour 15. We're going to probably, at the partnership at least, put out additional information. We'll probably do some other conversations with folks, certainly, as we go through this period of time. But today we really want to give folks an overview of really where we are now, where the process is. I believe as we speak, they are uploading the CSBG Draft Annual Report for the 30-day comment window. So we know we have a 30-day window with which to provide comments to OMB on these 4 modules that we're going to walk through here today. We're going to talk about that process, what you're going to need to be doing, and how we're going to be responding as a network, states, agencies, and associations, along with the national partners. We're going to talk about how all these pieces of the CSBG Performance Framework really fit together and how this annual report ties all those pieces together. And I should say today's webinar is not a deep dive analysis. We are not here to say one way or the other where we stand on some of these proposed modules at this point. This is not an analytical webinar. It's an information sharing webinar. We're going to walk through what this packet looks like in terms of its differences from the 60-day comment window. We know that a lot of you provided comments. We're going to talk about that feedback and how OCS and NASCSP took that comment and have reframed some of those elements here in the 30-day comment window. We're going to talk about the new estimate around the hourly burden in terms of states and agencies and the reporting needs. We're going to talk about the implementation process, the timeline that's ahead of us. We know there's some questions already, so we have some FAQs for some frequently asked questions, and we certainly at the end want to make sure we have some time for Q&A. Next slide. So let's start off. Where are we now? Let's go to the next slide. You've seen these arrows, these time frames. As you know, earlier this year, there was an informal comment period on some draft Roma Next Gen stuff, right? So we had 60 days A lot of people provided comment. We provided comment at the partnership back in April. Excuse me. Then in June, there was the release of the first formal comment period with OMB and OCS, which lasted 60 days, ran through middle of August. We, among a number of you, provided feedback to OCS. Here we are starting today our 30-day comment window, which will run 30 days, and we'll get into some of the nitty-gritty on that. But this is really the last opportunity. I mean, you've seen other iterations of OMB comment period, most recently certainly the overtime rules that were out for OMB comment, also the super circular that was out for OMB comment. So this is not a new process, but we know that this is really our last kind of window of opportunity. And yes, the lights just went out behind me, so I turned dark on your monitor, so my apologies for that. So with that, we're going to go to the next slide. I'm going to turn it over to Janae. Janae?
Thanks, Denise. We're so excited to be here. And as you said, we are talking about the CCG Annual Report today. We have had a lot of questions, and so we just want to clarify that this will report the CCG IS survey that NASCSP has traditionally collected. With this CCG Annual Report, I want to say that we really went through all of the current IS and the proposals, and we kept a lot of the same existing elements that are currently in the IS. We talked about state administration. We discussed the local agency CSBG expenditures, the resources administrated by the CCG network, the participant demographics, and then the national performance indicators for individuals, families, and community. And again, these are all what's found in the statute. Some new additions on the next slide to the CCG Annual Report is that for Module 1, this would be reported by the state, and it's going to be reported on the federal fiscal year, so October through September. That it links to the new CCG state plan. It will be entered into OLBC, and so we're really excited by the fact that a lot of information from the state plan will be auto-populated into this annual report. And it allows us to make the connections for the performance management framework by reporting on the organizational standards, the ACSI, and the ROMA system. Module 3 will allow for reporting progress over time for community. So I know that some of you may not have these all memorized, so Module 3 is community. And this was a request by the local agencies that community change takes a very long time, and you're putting a lot of effort into that. And so they wanted to be able to have the opportunity to talk about all of the time and effort that goes into actually finally having an outcome. So you might be working on a community measure for 3 years before you actually are able to report it. We also allow for counts of change, which are numeric reporting, rates of change, and a strategies list. We'll go over this further in this webinar. And then Module 4, which is the individuals and families, we have enhanced the demographics. We wanted to ensure that we were matching up with the other reporting programs that you have, Head Start, WIOA, et cetera. We have enhanced the indicators, and we have done something that has been a request of the network for a very long time. We removed the outputs from the National Performance Indicators, and we've provided you a services list. So there's not a confusion with the National Performance Indicators. They're all outcomes that are going to be reported on. So with that, I am going to turn this over to Jeannie, who's going to walk us through how this annual report fits into the performance management framework.
Thanks, Janae. I really appreciate being here at the Community Action Partnership today and the support of the partnership staff, wherever they may be, whether they're here or out in Salt Lake. We really appreciate all the partnership we've had with NASCSP and with ANCRT, and have had good conversations with NCAP in the last several months about where we're at. And so just want to off the top say thank you to everybody. We've always said from the beginning that this process would end up in a good place if we all work together and use the wisdom of the network, and I think we've demonstrated that time and time again. I just am going to set a little context here. Probably many folks that are on the video on the call today may be familiar with the larger framework that this fits into. But just as a little reminder, because I think it's important that we remember what the bigger picture here is, I'm tasked with sort of going over the broader context. So the proposed CSBG Annual Report is really the final piece of our performance management framework. And that performance management framework really covers all the work we've been doing for the last 4 or 5 years on lifting up and strengthening the Community Services Block Grant and the Community Action movement. And just to remind folks, there are two elements of the performance management framework. There's the side that really helps us look at efficiency and the side that lets us look at effectiveness. So that's how well does the network operate and what difference does the network make. As far as efficiency, we've created the local organizational standards, the state and federal accountability measures, and then the whole ROMA process. And then the so what, or the what difference we make, really gets at ROMA Next Generation, or the National Performance Indicators for Families and the National Performance Indicators for Community. And all those pieces come together in the annual report. And as we walk through what the report looks like now, after we've made significant changes after the 60-day comment period, you'll still see that the report really lifts up organizational standards, state accountability, and results. The updated CSBG Annual Report is a complete package, and it supports our work at the community level, at the state level, and at the federal level. It really allows us to look at data modernization, our infrastructure, and increasing capacity for analysis. The Performance Management Framework positions CSBG as a model of credible national performance management, and it really enhances the credibility of the CSBG network across the country, here in Washington, at the state level, and at the local level. The Performance Management Framework is really made whole through the CSBG State Plan and the CSBG State Annual Report. These things work together. We need both pieces for this performance management framework to work. Among other things, the CSBG State Plan requires the state to explain their plans for organizational standards, for state accountability measures, and for ROMA. And then the CSBG Annual Report will require the state to report on actuals, on what actually happened, what was achieved with organizational standards, state accountability measures, and ROMA. So we really do need both pieces to make the performance management framework work. Next slide. The CSBG Annual Report is a reporting mechanism that's required by the CSBG Act. And as Janae said, we've had the CSBGIS in place for many, many years. It collects a lot of the data that we talk about in the annual report, and much of that data is driven by the requirements in the CSBG Act. So you have the community action plans that set out goals and objectives for local agencies, and those are tied to the community indicators and the family indicators. There's information in Module 1 and Module 2 about the expenditure of CSBG, and then in Module 4 we have information about the individuals served, the family and individual level indicators. All of that is really called out in the CSBG Act and is required for the federal office to collect from states and from local agencies. So how does this all really fit together? We have a great slide here that tries to pull in the different elements that are reflected in the performance management framework and in the community, the annual report, and in the state plan. So first we have the community needs assessments that local agencies do and that states review, the community action plans that are required if you're receiving CSBG money, the state CSBG plan that states are required to provide to OCS in order to receive CSBG money at the state level, the CSBG Annual Report that actually says, okay, how did you all do on your planned work, and then we use that data to prepare the congressional report. So these are all the elements that we're trying to capture in the annual report and the state plans and report on. So the annual report is, as Denise said in the beginning, you know, we've talked about the annual report, we've talked about Roma Next Generation. Sometimes we use those interchangeably. Obviously, the CSBG Annual Report is a critical step in helping us move forward with Roma Next Generation. A lot of the outcome, the results, the indicators that are reflected in the annual report help us fulfill our Roma Next Generation promise. Also with Roma Next Generation, we've really sort of been striving for continuous quality improvement. This isn't just about reporting, but it's about doing things better for low-income people and for communities, creating a culture of continuous learning and continuous improvement across the network. And that takes data and information, and that is much more than just about reporting. Ultimately, Roma Next Generation will help us increase robust results for low-income people and communities, which has to be the driver for all of this. That's what we're all working toward and what we all care about most. The proposed CSBG Annual Report has gone through significant modifications, and I think we all want to emphasize that the report that we posted last week on the OCS website and that we're talking about today has a lot of changes that reflect comments that we got in the 60-day comment period over the summer. And we're going to talk in more detail about that. We're going to, as Denise said, we're not going to do a deep dive today. There'll be webinars that NASCSP and CAP and OCS will host in the coming weeks. But we want to give you a highlight of where we're at to sort of aid you in your review of this version of the annual report. Janae?
So the feedback that we received during the 60-day comment period, we heard from 134 sets of comments, and that means that we received lots of letters that proposed recommendations, suggestions, and as Judy mentioned, we really have changed the CCG Annual Report a lot based on that feedback. One of the things I do want to say is that as we changed it, it's not that different than what we're currently doing, and it's just some enhancements is where we really go back to. The next slide. So as we talk about this, the first module, the state administrative module, for those of you who are CCG experts, which I know we have some of them on the phone today, this would be traditionally what you would be reporting in sections A, B, C, and D. On here, there were two major points that we really heard about. There was a question about B7, which was a summary of analysis, and in that area where the last packet had recommendations on some questions that would be asked from the field. And then there were questions on section D2, which was how you would report on organizational standards and the performance. So the network responded and provided us a lot of feedback. We also met with Roma practitioners, and what the recommendations that came through, next slide please, which is not apparently coming through on the slide, but the modifications that you can't see here with this picture is that we chose to remove B7 and that we moved that into section I, which was the Roma systems reporting, and then we revised the reporting for the organizational standards. So hopefully on the next slide we'll be able to see a little bit more information on that. So B7 was removed, but it wasn't completely deleted. When we looked at this, we wanted to be able to talk about, in section I, which is the Roma section for state, really what was the state support of Roma. It does continuously ask, because there is part of the statute that says Roma system or other adopted system. I do want to clarify that per the state plan, states do state what system they're going to use, and our states have chosen to say that they're going to use Roma. Then we also discussed the state review the CCG eligible entity data. So when the local agencies, when you turn in your information to the state, what does the state do to review that information? How do you review the targets that you put into place? How do you review the accuracy? Then it's the state feedback on data collection, analysis, and reporting. So how does the state get this information back to all of you? And what does that process entail? And then finally, we have some options, 2 to 3 options for the state to be able to talk about how the local agencies improved their services through using the ROMA data. And this is very similar to some questions that we've had in Section B historically of the IS about successes. For B7, the organizational standards, we had a lot of comments that people were concerned that they knew that the organizational standards and that the accountability measures talked about how many agencies met 100% of the org standards, but that wasn't the full picture that we really wanted to talk about. That there was some additional information that we felt was really important, especially as the org standards are still relatively new in implementation. So commenters indicated that having additional information would be very beneficial. So the next slide, we have an example of what the new report would look like. We do continuously ask, the first question is, how many were targeted to obtain 100% and how many actually obtained that? And then we added these new categories. Again, this was recommendations from the field that we thought was really great. We wanted to know how many of the local agencies met 90 to 99%, 80 to 89%, 70 to 79%. I want to point out that we don't ask for anything lower than 70%, that these are our target areas, and that this would be auto-calculated. But this helps us get an understanding about, what is the range of how many of the organizational standards were being met or not met. And then on the next slide, we go a little deeper into that. And we wanted to figure out, for each category for the organizational standards, of the local agencies assessed, how many met the categories within each of them. So how many met all the consumer input involvement or the board governance. And this will really help us in understanding what additional training and technical assistance is needed and what areas we can really assist network at the federal, the state, and the local level in implementing the org standards. So moving forward, I am going to now turn this over to Barbara, who was having some technical difficulties, so we're hoping that we can hear from Barbara. We're unmuting her now. Barbara, are you there?
Hello. Yes, I am.
Hi,
hello?
Barbara. Yes,
Hi.
we hear you.
Good, good. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Module 2, which is about the agency expenditures, capacity, and resources. There were a couple of questions that came up for this module, and I would say that the important thing to remember about this module is that it's become the home, the hub for all of the agency information that was included in several different places in the current IS report. So things like Section F and Section E in the old report, and some things that were in the National Performance Indicators under Goals 4 and 5. So in this module, we had the reporting of CSBG funds, and one of the questions was, where did we put administration? So that was a question. There were also some issues that in this section in Goal 5, there were lists of certifications, and they were brought forward into this area. And several people noticed that some certifications that should be part of agency capacity to demonstrate strength were missing. And then there was a big question about agency capacity goals. And so what we've done is we've added some additional certifications, and we're hoping to be able to message the importance of agency capacity using the information that is now found in Module 2. So all of the things that you reported about numbers of partnership and kinds of partnerships, and things that had to do with training and volunteer hours, all of those things that were important to report that were really outputs and not outcomes are now found their home in this module. And then I'm going to now move on to talking about Module 3. Module 3 is the community level reporting module. And there were some confusion, some questions about several areas about the community level reporting. One was about indicators that were considered to be population level or social indicators. And there were questions about the broad range of outcomes that might be included. Also, there were questions about how you would determine baselines or percentages or rates that had to do with these big community level initiatives. In the original reporting, there was an emphasis, or there was a perceived emphasis at any rate, on the term collective impact, that particular strategy. And the network was responded with comments that had to do with some confusion about the emphasis on that particular kind of strategy. The status page that was presented seemed to be difficult and complicated to some, and so they were requesting that the status page be streamlined. So the next slide. We have, in this community level, we've reorganized the national performance indicators into two sections, one that includes counts of change, and one that includes rates of change, where baseline information could be used. And we've dramatically simplified this status page to make it easier to report on community initiatives, and we've removed that reference to collective impact initiatives. So what do we mean by these two different kinds of reporting that will be part of the community level NPIs? One is counts of change, and these are just basic measures similar to what are currently reported on in the NPI. So the number of jobs that were created, the number of housing units that have been developed or created, the number of resources that are maintained or created in the community. So that's more familiar. The other is the rates of change that is really based on some additional information that starts with a baseline and can show a % of change over time. So an example is at the community level is on the next slide, the number of safe and affordable housing units developed. So this one should be familiar because it's similar to the current community level NPI on housing. You would identify the population, and that would, or the community rather, and that would be auto-populated from the landing page, the status page. You would say these are how many units of safe, affordable housing we plan to achieve, and then you would or develop or create or build. And then in the third column, you would say this is how many we actually built. And then the fourth column would be auto-calculated. In the next example, the % of change, here's an example that's a % decrease in the rate of homelessness. Again, the community would be identified from the status page, would be brought in. And then in the baseline, you would say, this is the current % of homelessness in our community. The target would be, this is what we expect to achieve. This is the expected change from the baseline. And then in the fifth column, you would provide your actual results at the end, and the rest of the information would be auto-calculated based on the information that was put in. And the next slide is the Community Initiative Status Form, and this is the page in which you will enter information that then gets auto-populated in that community piece. You'll see number 7 on this slide is Identified Community, where you'll be able to pick a neighborhood, a school district, or other. You'll see there's lots of or others in this module so that you can add information On this page, you're giving some basic information. It's almost like the demographics in the family level module. And in this piece, you're identifying the community and the project and the partners and the expected duration of the initiative. Next page continues this information where you're also going to be identifying strategies, which are the outputs that will help us to determine what the agency did in order to achieve an outcome. And then 12 is progress on the initiatives, and then some narrative impact of the outcomes. If an outcome is achieved, one of the national performance indicators can be selected from a drop-down menu in number 14, and then final status and narrative. And that's the module 3.
Thanks, Barbara. I do want to add on to this. For the status form, it is something that would be more of a planning document. It would be something that a local agency would just have to complete once. We don't expect a lot of agencies to have multiple initiatives because we know that community work is still something that we're growing into. And it is something that's very quick to fill out, and then it will pre-populate everything else. And so my example that I used at the beginning of the webinar, where you have an initiative that may not actually achieve the results for 3 years, you would still fill this out so you could track the work that you're doing, and then once you actually have something that you can report, you report that under the Outcomes Indicators report. So again, it's just a way to compile everything that you're doing in the community into one consolidated place, and we have really simplified it a lot, and that's been based off of your feedback.
Janae, I would just emphasize there, too, that we're not talking about everything that the Community Action Agency is doing in the community. You might have an emergency services group that you bring together, you know, once a month and just share information, but you're not trying to pursue any outcomes. That would not necessarily be reported on here. The kinds of community initiatives that we're seeking to understand here are where you're pursuing very specific outcomes. And so that might, I think that's important for folks to know, because that really goes to how much burden this page would be. It's not every single little thing you're doing in the community.
That's a great point, Katie. And I think that it's important to make that correlation back to even how we do the individuals and families. That with the Community Action Plan, we set targets for what we're doing with individuals and families as we're doing the community needs assessments, and we try to figure out what community impact we're having. This would be the area that we would then plan for what your intended results are going to be. So moving forward, because I know we still have some questions and answers that we want to get to, we're going to go into Module 4, which is all around individuals, family levels. So we had 3 major issues that were raised with this module. The first one was there was a lot of concern about how we were talking about tracking outcomes for 90 to 180 days. The next was the stability measures that we had listed out. And then finally, the characteristics for new households and families. So what the revisions are that we were able to make is that we did remove the characteristics for new individuals and household reports, which I know made a lot of you very happy. So the demographics that are reported are similar to what you've already been doing. We revised the instructions for the reporting on indicators on tracking outcomes for 90 to 180 days, which I'm actually going to be going over in the next slide. And then we moved the financial well-being indicator under the finance area, and we created an outcomes across domains, and that's what's going to allow us to allow you to choose whether or not you report on the number of individuals and households who obtain one or more outcomes. So this means that we currently in this packet do not have stability measures that are separate from everything else. That these 2 that we have, the financial well-being indicator and the outcomes across multiple domains, these are just selected whether or not you want to report on them, just like the other measures. So let's talk about the tracking the outcomes over time. So an example that we have here is in employment. We have asked how many people obtained a job. And then we say how many people were able to maintain that job over 90 days, over 180 days. We had a lot of people who were very concerned about whether or not they would have to go back and follow up with all the program participants And what we wanted to do is we wanted to expand upon the definitions here to say that the only time that you would report on whether they maintain the job for 90 days or 100 days or housing is if that's actually part of your core program, if this is more like a wraparound case management program. So you would only do that follow-up if it's already set up in your program. You don't have to do it for everybody who walks through the door. And so that was the definitions that we were able to provide. So we didn't remove the tracking of 90 and 100 days. We just clarified that you report it if this is part of what you're already doing.
Janae, before you dive into burden,
sure,
sort of as a good segue to that, I want to go back and emphasize for a minute that we did remove the characteristics for new individuals household report. I had to make sure I got that name right.
I know, we play with so many names.
But that, you know, we universally heard from a lot of commenters that that report caused a lot of heartburn for community action agencies for a variety of reasons. But I think in the end, it really became clear that that was going to contribute significantly to burden because folks were going to have to track in their systems something very different from what they're currently tracking. And so this is an example where we removed something that we think really probably has a significant impact on burden, and not just in the amount of time, but in the amount of money it might have taken to upgrade a system. And Janae's going to talk a little bit about our burden estimates, but I want to sort of really flag that as a significant change that had an impact on a lot of what we did when it came to estimating hourly burden.
Thank you, Jenny. So now we're going to go into the burden estimate. That with the first Federal Register notice, we did release what we thought the initial burden would be. So if you go to the next slide, we looked at all of the comments that we received, and we have updated the burden. This was a really lengthy process that had a lot of components that we needed to review. For the initial estimates for the state, we said that it was 164 hours per state and 242 hours per local agencies. We did increase in this packet the burden for both the local agencies and for the state, even though we know that from the previous packet that was released for the Federal Register Notice 1, we reduced a lot of things such as removing the demographics for new individuals and families, from streamlining the reports on the communities, to removing some of the other areas. We realized that we wanted to project what it really was going to take to connect up the performance management framework. So what this burden estimate includes, and this is one thing that I really, on the next slide, think, one thing that I really want to drive home is that some initial responses that we've already gotten is, oh my gosh, this is a lot of time for us to do data entry. This actually isn't just on the data entry. That this burden estimate includes everything from data entry to review, that's that analysis component. The data collection process, so as we talked about connecting that to your community needs assessments, your community action plans, setting those targets to how you report, to how you review, that's part of it, as well as training and technical assistance for every module and section. So even though this new CSBG annual report isn't that different than the current CSBG IS, one thing that we saw that was a trend across the trainings that we do, like Denise's out of the office, and the feedback that we received, is that there was a lot of comments that said ROMA has been implemented unevenly throughout the nation, and that we had some people who were already doing a lot of these processes, and we had others that were still learning on what this really means to be able to set a target to report to get an unduplicated count. So we had to take all of that into our burden estimate. We know that we had 52 state grantees and about 1,035 sub-grantees, local agencies. And we wanted to be able to do an average on what this was going to take for each. And we knew there was going to be a range, that some of you have very sophisticated statewide performance management systems that already do this, but you still have to update your information to collect some of these new areas like the state admin or the new demographic areas or the modifications that we made for the indicators. And that some of you don't have anything in place right now, and so you're investigating what you can put into place. So all of that was taken into account, and we even broke it down on the second table per module. that even though Module 1 is predominantly for the states to report on, as you saw earlier, we do have some questions that the subgrantees are going to have to answer. Module 2, this was something that's pretty normal for everybody to collect, but it's also very important that we get the accurate fiscal that's being reported, your agency capacity measures, et cetera. Module 3, which is the community measures, you're not going to have a lot of activity with the community measures that they do take over time, so you have the initial setup of your state status or your local agency status stage, and then you're reporting out. And then Module 4, which is your individuals, families, the demographics, and as well as the indicators and outcomes.
Today, I'd just like to say here that we really did look closely at the comments that we got. We got 134 comments from community action agencies, state associations, states, the national partners in the 60-day comment period. And some folks had taken time to really give us some input on burden hours, and we looked at that closely when we were revising these burdens. So part of the equation in the change that we've made this time around is using data that people gave us early on in the 60-day comment, and the other piece is making changes to some of the forms that reduce burden. And I think if folks really look at these hours and look at the range, they would probably find that they fit in that range somewhere in the work that they're doing now around their annual report, under your collection of demographic information for your clients. And, depending on the size of your agency, you may have a lot of staff that are collecting demographic information. You may have a few. That's not changing very much under this annual report. So I really just want folks to think about, what am I currently doing to collect and review and analyze and report this sort of data, and how different would that be? Because I think when folks really take the time to look at what we have now as compared to what they're doing, you're going to see that it probably makes sense and it falls in that range somewhere.
And this isn't just the average hours of one individual. We know that in some cases in smaller rural agencies, you might only have one person who has partial time to be able to dedicate to this. But we also have larger agencies that have multiple staff working on this. They actually have divisions working on this. And so that's the real uniqueness of the block grant, is being able to do an estimation. So what I would say about this is, when you look at this average range, just go back to the previous slides where we talked about this isn't just the data entry. That's not what this is about. That this full report, the CCG Annual Report, is not just about a report. It's about being able to tell the story of what community action does, and being able to connect up all the amazing uniqueness that we have with our community needs assessment, CAP plan, our reporting on our state plan. And that this estimate includes what it takes to do that entry, the analysis, the collection, but also that much, much needed training and technical assistance as we get used to any kind of new system. Okay, so next steps, I'm going to, let's see, Denise is going to be covering the next steps for us.
Yep, thank you, Janae. All right, so you know that the Dear Colleague letter that came out last week, I want to say, certainly has a lot of good information beyond just what's in the modules that are in the formal federal reporting package. So I encourage you to take a close look at the Dear Colleague letter. It does go a bit more into what has changed and perhaps why. Here's the website, certainly where the resources are at. I know they're going to be up. I believe they're already up on the partnerships website. I believe they're up on NASCSP site. There's a lot of places you can certainly get this information. You see here the actual website for the Federal Register notice. I'm going to go there just to make sure I know exactly what the process is, so you want to make sure that you may want to click there as well to take a look at the actual Federal Register release. Next slide. So our next steps. Next slide. All right, so today's D-Day, right? We opened up for a 30-day comment window, November 1, 2016. We have 30 days for our public comment period. All comments this time will be submitted directly to OMB, the Office of Management and Budget. OMB will be the ones to review the submitted comments and either approve or request additional changes to the CSBG Annual Report. Now, again, the partnership will be doing an analytical review. of the modules. We'll be sharing that, our review and feedback with the network. I know that NASCSP will with their membership as well. But for right now, we want to make sure all of you are really taking a close look at this document. And one of the key things to keep in mind is that this is a 3-year approval. This is not a one-and-done situation. Now that this will be through the OMB clearance process, OCS and the network will need to do a review every 3 years. So if something's not working 3 years from now, we'll have an opportunity to provide comment and feedback at that time as well. So we're not locked into something for the next 20 years. We have a 3-year window for this current approval process. And OCS is looking at creating such an infrastructure to help support those future clearances. Next slide. All right, so let's talk a little bit about our implementation timeline as well, because all of this isn't going to happen tomorrow, right? We have some time. Now, this first bullet, though, I know can certainly, there's something happened in March 17. That's an awfully quick, it feels very quick turnaround, but a lot of that information is what was in the model state plan that the states had to report, is what's in Module 1 in terms of the output, or the outcome of the year's worth of activity. So, not saying that, you know, what the states may be thinking about that window of reporting time, March 31, 2017, though the states will need to report on OLDC, the Online Data Collection System, Module 1. Phase 2, though, you look at that window of opportunity, that's a little bit longer, right? So states will report on modules 1 through 4. So the states report after the agencies submit information, right? So that'll be for the fiscal year 18 CSBG Annual Report. Now that's a little way, now we don't have time to dilly-dally, obviously. There's a lot of work here to be done, but again, this isn't happening tomorrow. But there is a window here and a sense of urgency to move us forward. So that expected submission date for the first time that all the modules would be reported up to the feds would be March 31, 2019. Now you got to back in agencies, right? So when the states are going to need the information from you submitted wouldn't be March 31. That's when the states would submit, or that's when the information needs to be fully submitted. But that's a little ways out there. So we just want to make sure folks are aware of some of those time frames. So with that,
I do want to jump in.
Please do.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I do want to jump in because we have been getting a lot of questions because this is replacing the CCG IS, just not yet. So for the March 31st, 2017, the reports for the CCG IS, other than the state section, will still be the same. So you'll still follow the same processes for your local agencies, and now we're working with our states to help them transition to reporting into OLBC. And so that, just know that nothing's changing for the local agency report this go around, and that we're already working with states and local agencies on that. That's it.
Okay, great. I think I'm going to be turning it over to Jeannie now for Q&A. Or frequently, FAQs, excuse me, not Q&A yet, FAQs.
Yeah, we have a couple of frequently asked questions that we thought might kind of prime the pump and get folks started. And the first one is, why are changes being made to the annual report at this time? And I know, this question comes in a lot of different forms, like, we've done the organizational standards, we've done the state and federal accountability measures, why do we need to change the annual report? Haven't we done enough? And I think the big piece to understand about this is that we did make those changes. We made changes, we implemented organizational standards, and there's great examples of success stories out in states and agencies due to the organizational standards. We've implemented established state and federal accountability measures. This isn't just about the local agencies. This is about all 3 levels being accountable. And we have to have a vehicle or a mechanism to find out how those things went. So that's part of why the annual report is changing. We needed to go in and we added questions about how did it go with org standards, how did it go with accountability measures, and those are in Module 1. So some of the reason that we're doing making changes to the annual report are because we've been making a lot of changes over the last 4 or 5 years, and we have to bring those to closure. I think that we have a great story to tell in the community action movement right now about all the reforms that we've been making, the things that we've done to strengthen accountability and be able to serve low-income people better. And that we've updated a lot of our systems and processes. The annual report, quite frankly, had not been updated in many, many years. And that's also a reason why you see the changes that you see, is that we ended up doing quite a number of things in the annual report because we hadn't made changes in the past. So I would say there's a lot of reasons converging for why we're making the annual report changes. You look back at the law, we've got some slides here that sort of recount some of the things that I mentioned in the top of the webinar about the annual report being required, and really going back and thinking about what do we want to say about things like how the funds were used, plan versus actual, what results really look like. So I think that the good news is that once we get the annual report completed, this network is going to be perfectly positioned to say to a new administration, a new Congress, you know, we've made significant changes. We are stronger than we've ever been. We're ready for a new challenge. We have commemorated our 50th anniversary recently of community action and made these reforms, and we're stronger and better than ever. So I would say why changes are being made, it's really because it was time in many, many different ways, and there were a convergence of a lot of different things going on that we've been responding to. The good news is that this is a 3-year clearance. We're going to learn some things as we move forward once the clearance is completed. And OCS is committed, and I am committed and have shared with leaders around the country that we will institute a structure so that there is constantly a group that's looking at the annual report, a group of practitioners looking at the annual report and seeing how things work and preparing for the next clearance. So if we do this right, we will not have massive changes moving forward in the next clearance. We'll be able to tweak things that aren't working, things that we thought might make sense but don't make sense on the ground or at the state, and get an even stronger report. But with this clearance, we're really putting that infrastructure in place for that to be an ongoing, continuous process. I think that's really important. We're not just going to say that at OCS. We plan on making changes to some cooperative agreements and action work plans that we have with some of our contractors to make sure that that work gets supported beyond just my presence at OCS. So we're committed to doing that. So I hope that that sort of gives folks a bit of context. If folks were wondering sort of like why we're trying to complete this last piece, those are some of the reasons that we think are important for everyone to understand. I'm going to skip over the GIFR modernization stuff and go to the next question.
So this next question, does the proposed CCG annual report diminish local determination? I thought this was really interesting when we got this question because we were getting in comments both sides of it. What we wanted to do is we wanted to be able to tell the uniqueness of the Community Action Agency network. And because community action agencies are able to use their community needs assessments to identify how they use the funds, CSBG, that are specific to their local agencies, it's not possible for us to just be able to pick 4 indicators and say, everybody report on this. As much as I know many of you, including some of my board members, would love that, that's not what this is about. So when we created this report, we did thoroughly go through the statute to see what was required and what was going to help us really talk about what makes community action unique. That we wanted to provide a greater number of options for reporting for the indicators, that when we rolled out the national performance indicators, you know, that was the first time that we tried to compile everything that you all were doing. And that we got some things right, but as I said earlier, we mixed outputs and outcomes. And so we were mixing things together, so we wanted to clarify that. So we wanted to recognize the uniqueness of all the work that you're doing, but still be able to tell your story. So we gave you many options for you to be able to choose from. But it's very important for you to know that you only report on what's relevant to your work. So does the CCG Annual Report get rid of local flexibility? No, it doesn't. If anything, it helps be able to really tell what's happening at your local agency. The next one, do agencies have to report on all the data points? As I mentioned before, you only report on what is relevant to your work. We have a common theme in this presentation, and that's making the connections through everything that's in the statute. That in your community needs assessments, you identify what programs you're going to operate, how you're going to affect the individuals and families' lives and change their communities, and that you are required to report on that to your community action plan to the state. And the state's then required to talk about the performance from the state level to the federal level. So you are required to do this reporting, but you only select which ones are relevant to your work. Now, initially, in the first packet, we didn't allow you to choose other indicators, and we realized that through your comments that we wanted you to be able to tell us if we were missing something, and that this has really been invaluable to us in the past with the CCGIS, that we thought we had covered all bases, but we really were missing some of these other indicators. This is something that you would work with through your community action plan process with your state, that if there are not listed national performance indicators that work for you, that you select your own one, and the state understands that, and that's how you report that up to us so that we can add to this. I want to point out that we didn't add other to the strategies or services list because we wanted to ensure that we kept that as comprehensive as possible, but that it didn't turn into a list of 3,000 different reports that you could choose from. Along these lines, we also get this question a lot. I'm unable to get a complete agency-wide unduplicated count due to multiple databases, so how do I report this? The unduplicated count for the demographics has been part of our history for a very long time. But we do know that when we go into local agencies that many of you have different databases that don't necessarily talk to each other. Luckily, we're moving towards that you have some really great states out there that are doing data warehouses and data sharing, but that it's not all there yet. So we've enhanced even more from the previous packet, this section, that we ask for you to list the total unduplicated number of individuals served in each program. So what does that really mean? That means that you may be able to get an agency-wide unduplicated count. However, you have Head Start that has a database, and that Head Start doesn't speak with your other systems. And so you know within your Head Start database that you serve 1,024 individuals. So you can report that here, say that the program is Head Start and that there are 1,024 individuals that are unduplicated within that program, but might be duplicated a bit in the others. The same is with the household. This will really allow us to be able to understand where there are barriers for systems integration that will allow us to be able to work with OCS to help develop memorandums of understanding between programs and really talk about the challenges. For me, this whole report is the lifeblood of talking about who we are, who Community Action is, and how we're different from other nonprofits. And so it is gathering all this other information, which can be challenging, but it is doable.
So the next question, the next common question is what training and technical assistance will be provided to CAAs, and I'm going to hold off on that, and if we have some time we can come back to it, or we might, if we have a lot of online questions, we can address this in a future webinar. But one thing I want to say before we look at some of the questions that have come in online is that regarding the unduplicated count, I think, that's been a big issue in our field for a long time. And I think we all are looking to push the envelope on data systems to be able to analyze and, have data that we can make better decisions from. And I think when we embarked on this process, we thought perhaps we could go out farther than maybe what was realistic for the field. And what we have tried to do in the report that we have right now is move the network forward, but in a very reasonable way. So an example of this is that we've added the element of collecting information about services and strategies, because that was a piece that we need if we're going to be able to look at who we serve, what services they get, and what outcomes they achieve. We need to consistently be able to have those components. But we may not be able to do high-level analysis yet. That may be down the road. And I guess what I'm trying to say to folks is that We at the national level at OCS and working with NASCSP and talking with the partnership and getting all the comments have really been committed to listening to where people think they are and where we need to go. And if you look at the report that we put out in March that folks made initial comments on, and you look at the report that we have out now, there are vast differences in those reports. And you might be somebody who made some comments and your comment wasn't addressed exactly, but there have been a lot of changes made. Not that we've made changes on everything, because as I'm trying to convey, we have tried to move things forward, but in a reasonable way. So I hope folks will take some time to look at that and reflect on that. Maybe go back and think about where we were, you know, not quite a year ago and where we are now. And I think it's a place we can all be proud of and be comfortable with. With that, I'm going to see if Cashin can bring up some of the questions, and maybe we can see which of these we can pick off in the time remaining.
All right, would you like me to go ahead and just read them out?
Let's scroll through there and see if there's any Janae and I see that are really critical, I think, to basic understanding first.
I did see one, Jeannie, that talked about will local agencies be reporting directly into OLDC?
Okay.
And one of the things that with this OMB clearance packet, first you have to get it approved, and then you build the system. And the areas that we've talked about with OCS is that we want to be able to allow flexibility for agency reporting, but that this is a state reporting tool. And so what we've been able to do with the Access database is that we do have some states that use Excel spreadsheets that the local agencies fill out that automatically upload into the Access database. We'd like to have that similar function for OLDC. We have tentatively discussed the possibility of local agencies having logins, but we're not there yet. So your reporting system, your reporting changes for the local agencies, we are ensuring that it's going to be something that would be easy for you to do and similar to what you're doing now.
Great. So there's also a question about OLDC and when that will be available for states for Module 1 input for the March 31, 2017 reporting deadline, and will there be an opportunity for states to view the OLDC display for Module 1 prior to input? And there will absolutely be an opportunity for states to review prior to their input, and we will treat the process of developing the annual report Module 1 just as we did the state plan. We had a demo testing work group where we asked states to come and help us test that module, and so we'll get feedback from states before that module goes live and is made available for everybody. We've already begun talking to the OLDC folks about building the pages for the admin module. They can't really go and do that robustly until we get the clearance, but we're in discussions with them. And just a reminder that those pages will be very similar to the state plan. The information is very similar. We're going to pull over, auto-populate a lot of information from the state plan into the admin module. So we have a good sort of base and learning. It'll look and work a lot like the state plan does. We've learned a lot in the state plan. We've gone through two periods now where states are using the state plan module, and so we've had kinks, but we've worked some of those kinks out. So we will be working with the states very closely over the next 3 or 4 months to get that all up and running and give people the opportunity. I would say to states, you know, think about the questions that are in the admin module now and be thinking about where you have that data and making sure you have all that kind of information, because the data entry is really the very last piece. You know, the sort of thinking about how you respond to these questions is where a lot of the work is.
So the next question we have, what year will local agencies begin to collect and report on community level along with individual and family level outcomes? So one of the things that I think is very beneficial about having Jeannie at OCS is that she understands from working at a local community action agency that it takes time for you to be able to change your systems as well as gather the information on the individuals and families and communities before you can report it. That's why there is a rollout for when the local agencies would have to start reporting. So the soonest that the local agencies would report on individuals, families, and communities would be for the 2018 fiscal year, that then would be reported in 2019, March 31st, 2019. That allows time for you all to be able to train and to understand what this means for your local agencies, as well as plan, change your systems, and start to report on your systems.
So we have a question about training and technical assistance, and that was the last couple of slides that that we had. And let me just say that we know that depending on where agencies are at, you know, they may need a lot of support in being able to report using this annual report, or agencies may be pretty much there. So we really have a range of needs. We at OCS have committed to getting out before the end of this year an information memorandum that prioritizes OCS's investments in training and technical assistance. So OCS has a certain amount of money out of the block grant to do training and technical assistance, and we do competitive cooperative agreements, NASCSP, CAP law, all have cooperative agreements from NASCSP to do different kinds of training and technical assistance. We have, over the last year, done a couple of focus groups at NASCSP. We did a focus group at the partnership summer training, and we have a bunch of input from the American Customer Satisfaction Surveys that agencies, local agencies, and the states did about what their training and technical assistance needs are. We're in the process of analyzing and synthesizing that. We're going to put out an IN that sort of lets the field, lets states know what the priority investments are for OCS. And then what we have done is, through some existing cooperative agreements with the RPICs and with Community Action Partnership through the Center of Excellence, is we are supporting the development of state training and technical assistance plans. So before the end of the year, folks will sort of know what our priorities are. There's support through the RPICs and the Center of Excellence to work with states to develop training and technical assistance plans about how the state office and state association will be supporting local agencies to do this and more. And we think that we want to get very strategic and intentional about the investment. We know there's a lot that needs to be done, so we all need to be working together, very much thinking about this in a strategic and intentional way so that everybody gets the support. But I will say that even with all the investment OCS can make, states can make investments. Some states have discretionary funds. Agencies are still going to have to think about their needs in this space and how they will invest in them. I think that's just being honest. I think some agencies have invested in data collection over the years, others have not. And so, you know, some agencies may have to go a little farther than others to meet some of these expectations. But just remember, as we've said many times in this webinar, the data collection is not significantly different than what a lot of folks are attempting to collect right now. I think the issue is we have folks on all ranges of their success in being able to even meet the current obligations. All right. So I think we're, Denise is leaving us, needs to go off to another obligation. So do we have time for one more question or? One or two more questions. Okay. Thank you, Denise. We appreciate your time, and let the Salt Lake folks know we appreciate them sharing you with us this afternoon.
Well, thank you, and thanks for everyone being on today's webinar. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.
So the next question we have, will the new report not require a community action agency to identify people served as vulnerable and needing stabilization, which is goal 6 as a measure? Ginny, do you want to talk about the Roma goals?
Yeah, well, I will talk about the Roma goals, but I think the first place I'd like to start with that is that one of the comments that we got pretty consistently was that the indicators that we had under the stabilization domain, folks were concerned that those were really not good measures of stabilization, that there was a problem, that the financial well-being indicator was too narrow, and that the multiple domains, achieving outcomes in multiple domains really didn't answer the stabilization question. So what we ended up doing is we eliminated the stabilization domain, and I think that's an example of where we would have liked to have gotten to a certain place, but we're just not ready. The knowledge and understanding wasn't there. So we eliminated the stabilization domain, couldn't come up with an indicator that everybody was satisfied for that. We, as Janae mentioned, moved the financial well-being over to income and assets, and we moved created a multiple domain indicator because we think there could be some learning, some valuable learning to having agencies think and consider and track the number of individuals that achieve multiple outcomes. So that was the stabilization issue. Related to the issue of goal 6 in the Roma goal, sort of going back, we didn't talk about the theory of change today, but if folks will remember from prior conversations that we have a theory of change, that a lot of this is built on. That theory of change reflects our community action history, our values, reflects the statute, and at the top of that whole theory of change is our 3 goals that sort of encompass all 6 of the previous Roma goals. So I would contend that those Roma goals haven't gone away. They're just encapsulated in those new 3 goals that we have on the theory of change. And if you look through the annual report package now, you see those 3 goals reflected in modules 3 and 4. So the indicators that we suggest here in modules 3 and 4 support those 3 goals, and those 3 goals basically cover, we think in a very nice way, all the work that community action agencies do across 1,000 agencies in all the states and the national partners. So stabilization in no way has gone away. And if there's some kind of stabilization work that your agency is doing that's not reflected in any of the indicators, then there's that great indicator, other, and you should write your own indicator or measure and add that in. If it's a family or individual level change, it goes into Module 4. If it's community level, it's Module 3. So I hope that answers the question.
I do want to, we've gotten a lot of questions about whether or not this webinar is going to be posted, and we will be posting it and sending out the link. It will be recorded so you can watch it, or you can have other people watch it. We'll also have the slide deck ready for you. As Ginny and Denise have mentioned, there is more to follow. That this was a very high level, trying to get you introduced to the packet, and I do want to thank OCS for releasing the packet even before today so that it gives you a little extra time. 30 days is a very quick amount of time to go through all of this. But we will be releasing more tools, some PowerPoints for you to use on how to talk about this with your own state. There's going to be additional webinars. So more to come that will be posted through OCS, the partnership, and NASCSP. And I do want to really thank everybody for their comments, that it is a challenging process to develop any kind of reporting system. Nobody likes to report, but that's the only way that we can tell our story. And I think that it's so beneficial that OCS has allowed the network to be able to really have critical input on this and make changes to the report so that we can implement something that's really going to help move us into the future. Is there anything else you want to say?
Yeah, I guess I would just say that I hope folks have really, gotten a deep understanding that all along the way of this process, OCS really has tried to listen to the field, and be driven by the CSBG network. I think that there's a lot of wisdom out there across the community action agencies and the state, and when we listen to that and we make changes, we always get better. And I feel like the report that we posted last week is much stronger than where we were at originally, and will really strengthen our network. We held a practitioners meeting in between the 60-day comment and this period to try to get practitioners to help us come up with good solutions to many of the comments that you all made. I was just blown away. We spent 2 days with those practitioners from all across the country. The partnership, NASCSP, NCAP, suggested those particular practitioners, and they were just very creative, very energized, and I think that demonstrates that we're on the right track with this, and we really are doing the right things. And so I just want to encourage everybody to really take the time to read this. Don't make any assumptions. I think there's a lot that folks can be happy with here. Obviously, there is no report in the world, as you said, Janae, that everybody's going to be 100% satisfied with, but I think we've done some good work in this network, as we have time and time again, whether it's the Monitoring Assessment Task Force, org standards, or the CSBG Annual Report. This network always steps up and always does the right thing, so I just really want to thank everybody for that. It's certainly a time of transition, and I know there are a lot of nerves out there, and I just want to commend the community action movement for moving forward and doing their very best, so thank you.
If we didn't get to your question, please know that we are going to be going through the questions and updating our frequently asked questions and posting those, so that's something that you can find answers to all the questions that we received. So thank you, everyone, for spending the time with us today, and we look forward to speaking with you more about this process.
Have a good day.